Recently, I have found myself fighting a conspiratorial instinct I didn't even know I still had. Conspiracies are most likely to thrive during periods of political instability. Assassination attempts have historically always been conspiracy hotbeds, and when a lone gunman attempted to assassinate former President Trump, I was shocked at how eager my brain was to turn a tragic event into a conspiracy.
Well, the assassination attempt on former President Trump has led to a flood of online conspiracy theories and disinformation.
While on the right, users on X and Truth Social were claiming the attack was arranged by Democrats, my left-leaning social media feed was just as eager to indulge that instinct, with even prominent accounts pushing the narrative that the assassination was staged by Trump or his team to bolster his election chances. And when I stepped back to try and inform myself, I realized I don't actually feel like I know how to be informed anymore. After all, I don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to parsing truth from fiction. So before I fall down another rabbit hole, I wanted to talk to an expert. My guest today is Taylor Lorenz, a prolific technology columnist for The Washington Post. You may have read her reporting in the New York Times or The Atlantic, or seen her viral interviews with controversial online figures like Chaya Raichik, or read her book, extremely online, The Untold Story. Oh, I knew I was going to mess that up. The Untold Story of Fame, Influence, and Power of the Internet. Recently, Lorenz has been doing some excellent reporting on what's being called BlueAnon, a rising left-wing counterpart to QAnon, which, full disclosure, kind of seems specifically calibrated to trick me personally. And while BlueAnon hasn't stormed any capitals yet or anointed any shaman, QAnon started small scale too. So just one quick note of context before we get into this. This interview was recorded 2 days before President Joe Biden said that he would not seek re-election. The content of the interview is not really changed by that, other than the fact that we do occasionally talk about the Biden campaign in the present tense when it is no longer a thing. Taylor Lorenz, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we get into this, I guess we should probably clarify, conspiracies do happen, right? There have been real conspiracies that happen, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment.
Yeah.
How do you, as a journalist, differentiate a real conspiracy versus a conspiracy theory?
Yeah, I know. And I feel like the world is increasingly crazy. So things that might have seemed like conspiracy theories just a few years ago seem normal now. I would say there's a bunch of stuff that's just very easily debunked. So when we say conspiracy theories, we're talking about stuff that we know is factually untrue based off basic facts. I don't know,
Sure.
For instance, this conspiracy theory that Trump went golfing the next day after the shooting.
Oh.
That was completely false. Yeah. And this has been this pervasive thing that these big anti-Trump influencers continue to claim. And they're sharing these old videos of him going golfing. That conspiracy... It actually started on the right. So you had MAGA accounts sharing old pictures of Trump golfing, implying that he was golfing on Sunday to try to make him seem really resilient. And then that got picked up and sort of outraged, farmed by these other more liberal influencers. Oh, look, he's not even hurt. It was all cover up. It was all a lie. God. Same thing with the idea that this was a false flag. He had a gel pack of blood, that he hit to put on his ear or whatever. I mean, someone died. So we know that real bullets were used. Again, there's so much that we don't know. And that's not to discount people asking for more information, like a medical report or something from Trump's injuries. Those are legitimate questions. It's these more extreme conspiracies in the face of undeniable truth.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. The New York Times, I saw this morning, had this kind of complete timeline of with video from a bunch of different people's cell phone footage and aerial shots of outlining the entire thing as it played out, and it was pretty impressive. So I guess what you were saying, once you have almost a plurality of common sense evidence that's verified, at a certain point you're kind of inventing excuses not to believe the more obvious provable truth. Is our current media environment and the way that we have social media feeds with AI algorithms is that uniquely caustic? Does that just make it more prolific?
Yeah, it makes it a lot worse because I think what we used to have in the past was a lot of reliance on mainstream media outlets. There was a very limited amount of information that you could get, and you could really only get it from these places that had a lot of editorial standards, but also didn't, right? Let's not forget the big conspiracies that the mainstream media perpetuated, such as the idea that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or other things like that. So I'm not saying that the mainstream media has never promoted conspiracy theories, but rather this more fringe stuff couldn't travel as fast, and it generally wouldn't make its way up through traditional media structures. So when you had Alex Jones talking about how, tap water is turning people gay or something,
right.
like
For
this
the
is
frogs, in fact.
right. And it's like, okay, there's probably a conversation to be had about drugs in our water, estrogen, from birth control making its way into our water system. But it's this sort of like next step that people take where it's like, well, but it's all part of this master plan, from these global elites. And it's sort of like that idea of intentionality and sort of like the secret nefarious group that's doing all this. What social media has done is just made this problem exponentially worse because conspiracies can travel much faster than the truth.
Yeah. That's that expression that I think is like attributed to Mark Twain. I don't know if it actually is, but it's easier to fool somebody than it is to convince somebody that they have been fooled. And so like once, I feel like the act of actually tweeting a take or posting a reaction and kind of like going on record about it yourself, like just innately adds a level of like, oh, now I'm emotionally attached to this in a way that you might not be if you just kind of like had a thought in your head like I did when I was first watching that, like, what if there was like a squib in his ear somehow and it exploded? Like, just my brain instantly went to that place.
I think it makes sense that your brain went to that place because this is what we're conditioned to do. We're conditioned to sort of question our own realities, especially in the past few years. When you look at since 2016, you see the rise of so much conspiracism, and especially since the pandemic began as well. You have a lot more people spending their time online, and their media diets are so different. So it's really easy to kind of choose your own reality now and live within these echo chambers, and we all fall victim to it. Even the best journalists fall victim to it. I see stuff sometimes and I'm like, oh yeah, that seems true, and then later find out that it's false. So it's a really, really hard to navigate the current information and media ecosystem. And I think I get why people's brains go there. My brain goes there too, not necessarily for this, but certainly for other things.
Right. No, okay. So to that end, and I do want to get back to like just how we can balance that like skepticism with trying to be informed and not rabbit holing yourself. So what is BlueAnon, as you would describe it?
So BlueAnon is a term that was initially popularized by a bunch of right-wing figures, and it was used to describe the growing conspiracism surrounding Russia. A lot of people on the right felt like the mainstream media was putting way too much emphasis on, Russia's role in the 2016 election and sort of trying to discredit Donald Trump's win. I covered the 2016 election. Of course, there was election interference by foreign actors, as there is for every election and as the U.S. does around the world too. But I think, there was this idea that Russia is all powerful and Russia appointed Trump in office and all this stuff. If you go back and look at a lot of the way that a lot of liberals were talking about Hillary Clinton's loss, it was this sort of like sense of shock. And I think that people were trying to process it. And so when you came here saying, well, Russia did do all this messed up stuff, it's like they sort of ascribed too much to Russia almost. And I think a lot of that has been taken away as people have realized that the MAGA movement is actually quite organic in America as well. Not to say that foreign influence isn't a problem, but there is actually, unfortunately, this is our political landscape that we live in. So these people, especially in 2021, really started to call it BlueAnon. Then the term evolved to essentially speak to all of these centrist liberal style conspiracy theories, especially around Joe Biden. So we started to see a huge escalation around the debate. Where people accused the Secret Service of drugging Joe Biden. People came up with just every conspiracy theory under the book, basically, to explain away his bad debate performance. So I think the BlueAnon phenomenon just became more mainstream and the term kind of took off. It's very different than QAnon, obviously, but I think it is a good sort of phrase to speak to the fact that the sort of centrist liberals are becoming more conspiratorial.
It is a useful label because initially, like QAnon would not like refer to themselves as like QAnoners. Like that, that was a label described to the conspiracy theory that at a certain point they have like no choice but to adopt it because it's so like unambiguously true. I think like MAGA is a label like that.
Yeah. Well, Q was a Q was the internet
Q was a
poster.
person. Yeah.
There's no like singular internet poster for this, but there is this network of anti-Trump influencers that feed into these
Yes.
conspiracy theories.
And as it turns out, I followed all of them, and I didn't realize it. But I felt like I kind of found myself in the position of like wanting to escape an echo chamber that I didn't even realize I had created for myself. Because I was like, hang on a second, I just thought that was an objectively bad debate performance because he was old. And I was like I was at a bar watching it with other people and just everybody being like, oh boy. And then to go online and see this stuff was like, oh no, what has happened here? It exacerbated after this assassination attempt. Like, what form has this taken at? Like, what is the prevailing narratives that you're seeing?
Yeah, you're just seeing a lot of denialism. I mean, sort of related to the debate, right? It's not just, oh, Biden had a bad debate night. It's like the powerful elites all came together to take down Biden on this one night and turn against him. They've been plotting this for weeks. It's like, no, the media probably should have covered his age more before, because the debate was such a disastrous performance. Yes, they went, crazy the other way. That is unfortunately how our attention economy works. It's not some nefarious plot. And I think there's plenty of criticism to have towards the media, but again, it is not like some powerful elite person putting drugs in Biden's water. And same thing when you look at these Trump conspiracy theories. I think Donald Trump, we know, is not known to tell the truth. His team is not known for being very forthcoming about facts. So it's good to ask certain questions and find out what happened. I thought that the Washington Post and New York Times both did amazing visual analysis of what happened that day. But you're seeing, again, it's ascribing this agency. These Secret Service agents were, working against him. And why did this person cancel or whatever? It's like, honestly, they dropped the ball, and that's bad. And we should look into why that is. But this was not some sort of staged plot. Or if it was, like, somebody died, it's just, and I know that all these people, like these liberal influencers, are like, I wouldn't put it past old Don to kill one of his own supporters. It's like, that would be crazy. That would be insane.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah, it's like we actually don't have any evidence.
And there's zero connection between Trump and the shooter. And the shooter was literally Googling Biden appearances as well. Like, we don't know his motives yet, but we just need to be careful and slow down and wait for a lot of facts to come out before we jump to conspiracies.
That is true about like the slowing down and waiting. Like the media, like if you like me are terminally online, it does just feel like you're being like pelted 24/7, and there is this constant stream of updates from both sides of the campaign, and like it's been like that with the war with Israel and Gaza, just like for months. It's kind of been like there's always something happening, and so the second that there's not updates, it's almost suspicious. You're like, hey, wait a minute. When in reality, you used to get a newspaper a day, and that was it. Then you just had to wait to see what happened, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy just to think how much our media environment has changed, especially in the past 4 years, because people have just gotten so online, and the internet and internet discourse dominates our reality in a different way. We've also seen the complete dismantling of the press. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of local newspapers have closed in the past several years in counties and cities and towns all over America. So you don't have any local news. You don't have any digital news, like outlets like BuzzFeed and Vice and all of these other sort of digital forward-thinking outlets. Input, Mike, a place I worked, that were supposed to be the next frontier of journalism, have all been completely gutted. And the mainstream institutions that are left are a shell of themselves. Aside from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, it's really bleak out there. And so there's just not that many places for news. Even if you do want to be informed, you can turn to cable news, which is crazy and conspiratorial, and I would argue not accurate journalism, or you can turn to the internet. And so a lot of people are turning to the internet, and they're getting their news filtered through these influencers that have very partisan, very skewed views of events and don't have a lot of media literacy themselves.
That kind of leads naturally into something I was wanting to ask, which is that it's so profoundly difficult to avoid the like information silo effects, just because naturally the way that like your social media feeds work and your YouTube recommendations, TikTok, all that is like it's going to feed you what you want to keep you engaged, or stuff that like really pisses you off to keep you engaged. But also not everything does have an equal right down the middle neutral point of view. And so like you're a reporter, you have to check facts and stuff. Like what are you looking for as a reader and a consumer in terms of like, this is a trustworthy story or source?
Yeah, I think we just need to be really careful about who we follow and who we trust. I think there are trustworthy people that are not in the mainstream media, and the mainstream media is not always trustworthy. So I think it's really hard for people. But I think you have to look at the person's record and also be okay with people telling you things that you don't want to hear. One thing that was really frustrating after my article came out is all of these people that were like, I thought you were on our side, I thought you were one of us. Like, why are you a traitor now? Why are you doing this? And that is a really toxic way to think about the press. That's actually the mirror image of the way that the MAGA movement thinks about the press. And it's no surprise that you have people booing and jeering at reporters at Biden rallies now. I don't know if you saw that video that came out of people.
No, oh my God.
As a journalist, and again, somebody that covered 2016 and the first year of Trump's presidency, the only time I've ever seen journalists booed and heckled was at Trump rallies. And now you're seeing that same behavior at Biden rallies. And you have a lot of anti-media sentiment from Biden supporters. And I totally understand where it comes from, because we all hate that the media doesn't necessarily reflect what we want. Like the media itself is biased. We know this, but we still need journalism. That doesn't mean that we need to dismantle all of the journalistic institutions. We just need to hold them to account, right? And also recognize that sometimes we might have to hear hard truths. We might have to hear that, you know what, Biden fumbled that debate and there was no conspiracy for him to fumble it. He just bombed. These things happen. They really just want confirmation of their prior beliefs. And that's a really dangerous place to be in.
I think you got to like the emotional response of like being mad at the thing that's happening and like taking out your anger on like shooting the messenger, right? It's that same concept. Yeah. The sort of liberal influencers, and I saw this play out, it was completely ridiculous. I unfollowed some people, Taylor, I have to admit. I unfollowed because it was like, no, because it's like I saw that like just absurd. Like, what are we doing here? Because it was just
they started to promote MAGA stuff. It's so crazy, and I think it just shows how two sides of the same coin. There's been a bunch, especially around my reporting. I've reported very critically on Elon Musk and a bunch of other right-wing figures. Because of that, I have a lot of crazy people that write these sort of unhinged blog posts about how I'm this nefarious actor and all this evil stuff about me. And it's all complete nonsense. And it's completely just bullshit, basically made up stuff. A lot of stuff from like this crazy person that stalks me. As soon as these liberal influencers felt like I wasn't on their side, they started to share links to the exact same far right figures, promoting the exact same far right conspiracies about me and my reporting as Elon Musk promoted 2 years ago and libs of TikTok promoted last year. So that's not good, right? We don't want these big liberal influencers to suddenly just flip to the far right propaganda the minute that they're questioned.
Yes. For viewers of my channel, where I talk primarily about cults, and specifically the cult that I grew up in, Jehovah's Witnesses, and that is the kind of comment that I get on my channel from active members of the group who I have nothing but love for them. I criticize the leadership in their harmful policies. They're told by the leaders that people who leave and criticize the group are apostates. We're controlled by Satan. Yeah. And so the mere idea that this criticism exists, like they're not watching the videos probably, or they are and picking out one thing and going on a crazy diatribe about it. But at the same time, I know that I've done that. Like I've started to write the manifesto in the comments and then been like, wait, what am I doing? What am I doing? Yeah. There's something instinctual about it. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like I said, again, we all fall into these traps. It's just human nature to kind of want to, you don't want to hear things that challenge your worldview. And I think that's why we just need to be really careful that when we follow political leaders, right, we recognize them as fallible human beings worthy of criticism. These are powerful leaders, right? The president is one of the most powerful world leaders, right, in our entire planet. So
he's just a sleepy, nice guy. I don't know what you're talking about. You can't make mistakes.
We need to kind of recognize that it's good to criticize power. And also sometimes, what is that Onion headline? It's like the worst person made a good point.
Just made a good point. Yeah, devastating. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it happens more frequently than we'd like to think. And that doesn't mean that we need this false equivalence. Like, I really reject the idea that, it's just, if we could all just listen to each other more, like there are people pushing hateful ideology and we should not listen to those people. But we also don't want to mimic their behavior where we fall into this conspiratorialism, this dogma, this idea that, the media is out to get us and they're part of the elite and, we need to take them down. Like, that's all pretty bad for democracy. We actually do want a free press. So
I agree. I agree that we want a free press. That's something that I find really surprising about the BlueAnon thing, because I haven't made this about me in about 5 seconds, so I'm just going to reference one of the things that made me start thinking as somebody who, I was a Jehovah's Witness in 2016, and what started to scare me was he got elected, but also the fact that he so instantly started targeting the press and coining words like alternative facts. And that was something that I started to recognize within the group.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to note their attacks, right? This one guy that went after me, he didn't take criticism with my article. First of all, I embedded one of his tweets or quoted it, which we don't have to reach out for comment if we embed one of your public tweets or quote it. It's just you're not a material part of the story. But he was sort of so angry about that. And instead of just reaching out and being like, hey, I feel like I wasn't represented here, can you include comment, which I would have been more than happy to do, he went on this really crazy tirade. And it wasn't critiquing my article. And I think this is what people need to look out for when people try to discredit the press. It wasn't, hey, I disagree with her article for XYZ reasons. I know that I, maybe spread dubious information here, but here's why I think this, or XYZ. It was, Taylor Lorenz is part of the powerful elite. He was lying about where I'm from, lying about where I went to school, started just pushing again these conspiracy theories about my background, which is so crazy because it's look at my Wikipedia and it's all out.
It's not that hard to verify.
But it was this idea of she's part of this powerful, nefarious elite, and we need to take them down, and all of this stuff. And it was the personal attacks. It was also a lot of misogyny, a lot of she's just a TikTok gossip reporter or whatever. It's well, if that was true, you wouldn't be doing this thread. That that's not true. And so I think when you see your favorite influencers do this type of stuff, just look, are they making substantive, substantial? Are they making,
we'll stitch it all together in post.
Are they making legitimate arguments, or are they feeding into this MAGA type language, which is, journalists are evil and we need to dismantle the press? Because journalists do a lot of bad stuff. And again, I'm not saying don't criticize their coverage of Biden or whatever, right? But it's how you attack it. Are you going to say that journalists are elite and rich, evil people, which is such a joke?
It's the best paying job in the world.
I know, right? Everyone loves to work in journalism, the famously thriving, lucrative industry of journalism. But I think it's also people have a complete misunderstanding of what journalists do. They think of the Rachel Maddows of the world, the people that are not working reporters that we work in a union, we have a salary, we're not TV stars.
Yeah, is there a conflating of it's not even called the news? It's called the Blorbity Blorp room with Steve Johnson, and you just hear Steve Johnson's take in the Blorbity Blorp room, that famous show.
I think we should not consider cable news. I don't consider it journalism. I agree. Don't. It's not. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't sometimes do acts of journalism, but no.
Yeah, or that they can't be good at what they do, but it's a different
commentary.
Function.
It's commentary. What they're doing is essentially what these liberal influencers are doing on Threads and Twitter. It's just they're doing it on the television set instead.
Yeah.
And I think we should question all of these people because none of them are doing original reporting.
The actual influence of people in your position is greater, I think, than cable news, because who has cable and watches cable news anymore?
Exactly. Instead, people are turning to these online influencers and getting the same type of garbage to validate their worldviews. And that's a problem.
Yes. You mentioned something earlier that I think does explain a lot. And it's something that I definitely always have to check myself on and often fail to do, which is assigning malice where there isn't any. I think that's a lot of conspiratorial thinking in general, is assigning malice where there's actually incompetence. But I think that that assumption that somebody you disagree with is doing so nefariously, on purpose, that seems to be a root of a lot of the outrage.
There was a really good quote that Mike Rothschild gave me for my story, which is conspiracy theories thrive when people want a simple explanation for something that they don't understand. And I think a lot of people couldn't understand why, especially Biden supporters, why this person that they support, suddenly all these other people are questioning. And so it's easier to be like, well, the media knew it and they wanted you to do this and this was this intentional thing, rather than just like, yeah, a lot of people just didn't think he did a good job at the debate.
That's another tricky thing is there's sometimes like an inability to even allow the idea that somebody has come to a different conclusion than you. Like, well, you watched it wrong. If you understood what I'm saying, you would understand that you're wrong ontologically.
It was like, I did a story that got me canceled on Threads too, like a couple weeks prior, about Gen Z influencers not wanting to work with the Biden campaign. Now we know correctly that, and the New York Times did a story right after mine validating everything I reported as well. The Biden campaign is struggling to attract youth attention and youth votes and youth influencers. Now it's it's not sort of, now it's completely acknowledged. Had people acknowledge that, a month ago, 2 months ago, whatever, there wouldn't be this shock. I think it's like people want to live in their sort of land of delusion and consider their candidates infallible as well. I think putting political candidates on a pedestal also contributes to this problem.
Absolutely. Like kind of building what you view as your political activism like around a person instead of fighting for things you hold to be true.
Yes. Yeah. I think that the problem is just broadly that we're a lot of people consuming a lot of different media, and it's all very fractured. And so people live in these different realities, and it's very hard to break through and kind of connect with people.
It was interesting, like just following the discourse during the Gaza and genocide that's been happening, seeing that everywhere in my YouTube feed and my TikTok recommendations and all my friends that I follow talking about this in clear terms as a genocide, and then going on Threads, which is apparently only white liberals in their 50s and me, like just being like, that doesn't exist. What you're saying? Like kids aren't actually saying that, and therefore these protests are fake. Like they're just misinformed.
Well, right.
Like neither side knows that the other one exists.
Well, I think the protests, the young people certainly know that those types of older people exist, and they constantly fight with them, and they're constantly like trying to explain, no, actually we have legitimate concerns with the way that the state of Israel is behaving right now. There's so many people that this same group of sort of white, centrist, liberal Biden supporters, these people also fell for a lot of really crazy conspiracy theories about the protests and around TikTok and just around what young people are doing. They are the ones, a lot of them have young kids because they're Gen X or they're in their 50s. They have teenagers, they have young people in their homes, and they can't understand. They can't understand, why don't these young people believe what I believe? Now, in the past, 40, 50 years ago, right, you just be like, oh, it's those hippies, right? Or they're just, it's the music it's the Beatles, it's the music, it's media and technology is always blamed for this. This day and age, it's TikTok. It's TikTok that's poisoning their brains and radicalizing them and all of that. Never mind that, especially when it comes to Palestine, decades, this shift has been in the works for decades. Like young people have overwhelmingly supported Palestinians back 15, 20 years ago. So way before TikTok. So these are not shifting ideologies based on TikTok. They're shifting ideologies based on, I would say, people's awareness of the situation and also being able to hear more directly from Gazans and Palestinians as a whole.
For people who want to be informed and do want to find like a healthy media diet, being informed about something, but having a skepticism towards like institutions or narratives, is the solution to that just to like read stuff from across the aisle, just read everything? Like what is that for you?
Yeah, I think it's following reliable, independent journalists. I think there's a lot of amazing independent journalism out there. I think following journalists that you trust within mainstream institutions, if there are any, it's like, okay, I don't trust the New York Times, but I trust this person. A lot of people don't trust the Washington Post, but they know my reporting, right? And so I think it's finding those people that you trust and that are reliable and that are actually, that won't always buy into one narrative. Like they might say things that challenge your belief system, but that they're based in, you're not always going to agree with them. If you look for people that you're just only ever going to agree with, that's not good. I think also just be careful of these people that post these inflammatory all caps posts, right? Like the influencers out there, the people with they thrive on outrage and feeding into hyper partisan narratives. Just be careful.
Yeah, like, is the intention to make you angry? I guess I also wanted to ask you, I hadn't really planned on asking this, but I was like, oh, I have to do the mandatory thing where I ask you about AI. But just
Yeah.
from the sense of, like,
Well, it's only
have
getting
you
worse. Yeah.
it's not getting better, but from like a really practical sense, do you have a way of, if you're seeing a video, is there some calculus you're doing in your head, like as a journalist, or is it like context based? Like, what are your concerns?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of identifying AI driven content or AI created
Yeah,
content.
like it. Yeah, I'm just like, oh wow, wait, is this thing even real?
Well, I mean, I think the problem is actually people assuming everything is not real. Like that right now is the
Ah,
bigger problem is that people assume nothing is real. It's like how they learned about bots and now they assume everyone that disagrees with them is a bot. It's
yeah,
like actually a lot of this stuff is smaller than you think, and you probably aren't interacting with a bot. It's probably just a person that disagrees with you. That doesn't mean that there aren't bots and we shouldn't be extremely concerned about AI. I mean, I think AI is going to undeniably make basically exacerbate all of these issues. So I don't know that there's a really good way to necessarily determine what you're viewing as AI. I think it's just more about getting context and never trusting one video. I mean, there are
yeah,
these like telltale signs, right? Like look at the hands, like look at things. Those things will improve. And so I don't think that those are going to always be great ways to tell whether or not you're viewing AI generated content. The best thing to do is kind of look for other sources and look for legitimate news organizations that do fact checking and see if they've busted any of this
yes,
stuff.
that are held to standards.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, those were invented by the Illuminati to trick people. So that's
Well,
hard to.
again, journalists have an agenda too. I mean, let's not act like the traditional media doesn't also have a point of view. They do. Their
Right.
coverage is shaped by their own, it's really the bosses. So I hate when people say the journalists. It's like it's the bosses, and the bosses do want to promote certain things. That doesn't mean that everything they say is inaccurate. They do a lot of amazing work. It's just about finding that balance. So it's hard. I really wish we would teach media literacy in school because I think these are things that you actually need to learn when you're very young. But unfortunately, the right has really worked to dismantle those programs, and we're in a
Yeah.
bad place.
No, I agree. And media literacy is a lot of people who leave like a high control group or who are trying to sort of pull themselves out of like a conspiracy mindset or a rabbit hole. That's like a skill set you almost have to relearn, is like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
let me double check this. What do you recommend for people if they want to become more media literate? Is there like a thing you do, or I don't know,
Gosh,
like
good question. I wish there was like a manual or something for media literacy. There are a lot of good. I mean, people tweet this one graphic. I shared it too, about like what to do during a breaking news event, and it's like stop, basically slow down, realize the information comes slow. So
like it's like the stop, drop, and roll like cartoon diagrams that they would
yeah,
have like in your elementary school class. But for yeah,
exactly. It's like stop, don't retweet right away. Wait a minute, see what comes out, and don't just believe influencers. I mean, if somebody says to you, for instance, Trump was not golfing and here is how we know XYZ, don't believe a bunch of people saying, well, here's a picture of it or something if no other news is reporting it. Find good reporters that you trust and trust the
yeah,
actual journalists. And there are amazing independent journalists. I mean, I think Ken Klippenstein is a really good journalist. He covers national security, but I think he's somebody that does a good job of challenging different sides, and not just
yeah,
repeating what people in power have to say. And there's good, I mean, there's people like that on every beat. When for tech media, I mean, 404 Media is an amazing independent journalistic
oh yes,
institution. They're fantastic. Support things like that.
yeah. Well, that's why I really appreciate you coming on, because it's a subject that I've wanted to like talk to somebody about, and you're somebody who I've like I think I discovered your reporting like during 2016, and just like have been like, oh, like I kind of didn't notice that you like went to a different place, like from New York Times to Washington Post or whatever, because I was like, oh well, I just follow her on social media
I don't
and I
even
know that
like
she
to
writes
overly.
articles.
Yeah, I don't even have my employer in my bio. I don't like anyone to affiliate with me with any news organization.
But that's valuable, like to remember as a reader and a consumer of information, that like the actual individual reporters making up a news institution like are not the people at the very top making decisions about like, here's how we're going to lay out the front page of the website and here's the headlines we're going to use. Taylor Lorenz This has been a really great conversation. Where can people find you on the internet?
My YouTube channel.
Aside from everywhere.
Yeah, my YouTube. I have a YouTube now. So it's just Taylor Lorenz
Yes.
at YouTube. Also TikTok and Instagram and Threads. I'm on every app basically. But I made a broadcast channel on Instagram now, where I share the best like tech and internet culture news of the day. I also have a newsletter, taylorlorenz.substack.com. So
Thank you so much for being here, Taylor. Feel free to come back anytime.
thanks for having me. Awesome.
I think that's it.
Cool. Well, thank you. No,
That
thank you
seems
again
like-
for having me. This was so great.
Yeah, it flowed pretty well. I Bidened it up a couple times. I fumbled
I
my
always
speech.
do that. That's what and then I go back to edit it and I'm like, why am I why am I
Oh my God.
rambling?
The worst. Do you edit your own YouTube videos? Because
Yes,
the worst
that's how they
is
look like
seeing. Yes, the worst is seeing your the sound waves and realizing just like getting a shape to your own speech pattern and realizing like, oh my God, I see it in my head now, like I'm doing the thing where there's a long pause between the little waves. Gotta stop doing that. Yeah,
It's hard. It makes you realize. I mean, I hate all of the TV news people so much, but it's like, it is really hard actually to talk in front of a camera. So
It is.
well.
Yeah.